The rain hammered against Marcus Sullivan's windshield like angry fists. Each drop exploded into 1,000 smaller pieces before being swept away by wipers that could barely keep up with the storm's fury. Lightning split the dark afternoon sky, followed seconds later by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white against the black leather as he navigated his truck through what had become the worst storm Miller County had seen in decades. At 62 years old, Marcus had weathered many storms, both literal and figurative. His weathered hands told stories of decades spent working cattle ranches, building his empire from nothing more than determination and stubborn pride. The Sullivan Ranch now sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime Texas land, home to over 3,000 head of cattle and employing 47 families. Most folks in town knew him as a fair but demanding boss, a man who expected excellence from himself and everyone around him. But today, Marcus wasn't thinking about cattle or profit margins. Today, he was thinking about getting home safely to his wife Sarah before the storm got worse. The Weather Service had issued severe thunderstorm warnings, predicting flash flooding and possible tornadoes. Schools had dismissed early, and most businesses in town had closed their doors by noon. Smart folks were hunkered down at home, waiting for the storm to pass. The road ahead disappeared into sheets of rain so thick Marcus could barely see 20 feet in front of him. He slowed his truck to a crawl, following the yellow lines that seemed to blur and shift in the downpour. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts about road closures and rising water levels. Cottonwood Creek, which normally ran as a gentle stream through town, was now a raging torrent that had already claimed 2 bridges on the east side. Marcus knew he should have left town earlier. He had been meeting with his banker about expanding the ranch's operations, a discussion that had run longer than expected. Now he found himself caught in nature's fury, fighting his way home on roads that were becoming more dangerous by the minute. The smart thing would have been to turn around and wait out the storm at his office, but Marcus Sullivan had never been one to choose the smart path over the direct one. As he approached Miller Bridge, the old stone structure that had stood for nearly a century over Willow Creek, Marcus saw that the water below was running fast and high. The creek had transformed from its usual lazy meandering into a violent brown torrent carrying debris from upstream. Branches, pieces of fence, and what looked like part of someone's porch swept past in the churning water. The bridge itself seemed solid enough, but Marcus could see water beginning to lap at its base. He was about to cross when something made him pause. Through the rain and wind, he thought he heard something that didn't belong to the storm. It was faint, almost lost in the chaos of thunder and driving rain, but it sounded like a voice. A young voice calling out in distress. Marcus rolled down his window slightly, ignoring the rain that immediately began to soak his shoulder. He strained to listen above the storm's roar. There it was again, definitely a child's voice, high and frightened, coming from somewhere near the bridge. He pulled his truck to the side of the road and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from his glove compartment. Fighting against the wind that threatened to knock him over, Marcus made his way toward the bridge. The rain stung his face like needles, and his boots slipped on the wet asphalt. Lightning flashed overhead, turning the world briefly bright as day before plunging it back into stormy darkness. In that brief moment of illumination, Marcus saw them. Huddled beneath the bridge's stone archway, pressed against the massive support pillars, were 2 children. They couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, a boy and a girl, clinging to each other as the floodwater rose around their feet. They had found the only dry spot they could, but Marcus could see it wouldn't stay dry much longer. The creek was rising fast, and what had been their refuge was about to become a trap. Marcus didn't hesitate. 40 years of ranching had taught him to make quick decisions in dangerous situations, and every instinct told him these children were in immediate peril. He half ran, half slid down the muddy embankment toward the bridge, his flashlight beam cutting through the rain to guide his way. The sound of rushing water grew louder as he approached, a deep rumble that spoke of tremendous power and destruction. "Hey there," he shouted over the storm's noise. "You kids need help." 2 pale faces turned toward his light, eyes wide with fear and hope. The boy, who looked slightly older, had his arm protectively around the girl. Both were soaked to the skin, shivering uncontrollably in clothes that offered little protection against the elements. The boy tried to say something, but his voice was lost in the wind. Marcus reached the edge of the water and realized the situation was worse than he had initially thought. The children weren't just taking shelter from the rain, they were trapped. The water had risen while they huddled against the bridge support, and now it swirled around their ankles with a force that would easily sweep away someone their size. Worse, debris was starting to pile up against the bridge, creating a dam that was causing the water to back up and rise even faster. "What are your names?" Marcus called out, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring despite the urgency of the situation. "I'm Tommy," the boy shouted back. "This is my sister Emma. We got caught in the storm walking home from school." Marcus could see that Tommy was trying to be brave, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. Emma hadn't spoken at all, just pressed closer to her brother as the water continued to rise. Marcus estimated they had maybe 10 minutes before the water would be too deep and fast for him to reach them safely. "I'm going to get you out of there," Marcus yelled. "But I need you to listen carefully and do exactly what I say." He looked around quickly, assessing his options. The water between him and the children was already knee-deep and moving fast. If he tried to walk directly to them, there was a good chance the current would sweep him away too. But upstream, where the bridge met the bank, there was a section where the water was shallower and moving more slowly. If he could work his way along the bridge support, he might be able to reach them. Marcus pulled out his cell phone and tried to call 911, but the storm had knocked out the cell towers. No signal. He was on his own with no backup coming. These children's lives depended entirely on what he did in the next few minutes. Taking off his heavy coat, Marcus tied one sleeve around his belt and prepared to enter the water. The coat would help him stay warm and might be useful for the children, but more importantly, its bright color would make him easier to spot if something went wrong. He wished he had rope or some other way to ensure his safety, but there was no time to go back to his truck. "Tommy," he called out, "I'm coming to get you. When I reach you, I'm going to take your sister first, then come back for you. Can you hold on a little longer?" "Yes, sir," Tommy replied, though his voice shook with cold and fear. Marcus stepped into the rushing water and immediately felt its power. The current tugged at his legs with surprising strength, and the water was shockingly cold. Debris bumped against him as it swept past, pieces of wood, plastic containers, and things he couldn't identify in the murky water. Each step was a struggle against the current and the slippery rocks beneath his feet. Halfway to the children, a large branch came floating downstream directly toward him. Marcus saw it just in time to grab hold of the bridge support and pull himself out of its path. The branch crashed into the growing debris pile with enough force to shake the entire structure. Water sprayed everywhere, and Marcus realized that the makeshift dam was becoming increasingly unstable. "Stay strong, kids," he shouted, though he wasn't sure they could hear him over the roar of water and wind. Step by agonizing step, Marcus worked his way closer to the children. The water was now up to his thighs, and he could feel the bottom beginning to wash away beneath his feet. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene in stark detail. Emma was crying now, though her tears were lost in the rain streaming down her face. Tommy held her tighter, whispering something in her ear that Marcus couldn't hear. With one final push against the current, Marcus reached the children's precarious perch. Up close, he could see how young they really were, how frightened, and how close they had come to disaster. The water was now swirling around their knees, and chunks of debris were beginning to strike the bridge support where they clung. "Emma," Marcus said gently, trying to make his voice as calm and reassuring as possible despite the chaos around them. "I'm going to pick you up and carry you to safety. Then I'll come back for your brother. Is that okay?" Emma looked up at him with huge, frightened eyes and nodded slowly. Marcus could see she was beyond words, shock and cold having stolen her voice. He carefully picked her up, surprised by how light she was, how fragile. Her small body shook with violent shivers, and he could feel how cold her skin had become. "Tommy, I need you to hold onto this support and don't let go no matter what," Marcus instructed. "I'll be back for you in just a few minutes." "Be careful with Emma," Tommy said, showing a maturity far beyond his years. "She's scared of water." Marcus felt his heart clench at the boy's concern for his sister even in their desperate situation. These were good kids, brave kids, and he was going to make sure they both got home safely tonight. The journey back to shore with Emma was even more treacherous than the trip out had been. The little girl's weight, though slight, affected his balance, and the water seemed to be rising by the minute. Debris continued to crash into the bridge supports, and Marcus could hear ominous creaking sounds from the growing pile of wreckage. Lightning split the sky again, and in its brief illumination, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Upstream, maybe a quarter mile away, he could see what looked like a wall of water approaching. The storm had been dumping rain in the hills above town for hours, and now all that water was finding its way downstream in a devastating flash flood. They had minutes, maybe less, before that wall of water reached the bridge. Whatever happened, Marcus knew he had to get both children to safety before then, or they would all be swept away in the torrent. Emma whimpered against his shoulder as he struggled through the current. "It's okay, sweetheart," he told her, hopping. His voice sounded more confident than he felt. "We're almost there. You're going to be fine." Marcus's boots slipped on the rocky bottom, and for a terrifying moment, he thought they were both going down. He managed to catch himself against a submerged boulder, but the near fall sent a spike of adrenaline through his system. The shore seemed impossibly far away, and Tommy seemed impossibly small and vulnerable where he clung to the bridge support. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Marcus reached the muddy bank and carefully set Emma down on solid ground. She immediately collapsed to her knees, overcome by cold and exhaustion. Marcus quickly wrapped his heavy coat around her small shoulders. "Stay right here," he told her firmly. "Don't move, I'm going back for your brother." Marcus turned and looked back toward the bridge, and his heart sank. In the time it had taken him to carry Emma to safety, the water had risen significantly. Tommy was now standing with water up to his waist, and the boy was clearly struggling to maintain his grip on the slippery stone. Worse, the approaching wall of water was now visible even without lightning to illuminate it. Marcus plunged back into the torrent without hesitation. Every step was a battle against the current, which was noticeably stronger than it had been just minutes before. Debris struck his legs with increasing frequency, and he could feel the bottom washing away beneath his feet. The water was now moving so fast that it was difficult to maintain his footing at all. Tommy saw him coming and tried to smile, but Marcus could see the terror in the boy's eyes. The child was barely keeping his head above water now, and his grip on the bridge support was weakening. Marcus pushed himself harder, knowing that seconds could mean the difference between life and death. He was still 20 feet away when the debris dam suddenly gave way. The wall of accumulated branches, logs, and wreckage that had been building up against the bridge supports suddenly collapsed under the pressure of rising water. The result was catastrophic. A surge of water several feet high came rushing toward Tommy with the force of a freight train. Marcus watched in horror as the surge swept the boy away from his precarious handhold. One moment Tommy was clinging to safety. The next he was tumbling helplessly in the churning brown water, his small head disappearing and reappearing in the foam as the current carried him downstream. Without thinking, Marcus threw himself forward into the torrent. The water was now over his head in places, and the current was so strong it was like being caught in a liquid avalanche. Debris pounded against him as he fought to stay oriented and search for any sign of the boy. A flash of red caught his eye, Tommy's shirt. The boy was maybe 30 feet downstream, struggling to keep his head above water as he was swept along by the merciless current. Marcus swam harder than he had ever swum in his life, his muscles burning with effort as he fought against the flow. Tommy went under just as Marcus reached him. Without hesitation, Marcus dove beneath the surface, groping blindly in the murky water until his hand found fabric. He grabbed hold and pulled, breaking the surface with Tommy in his arms just as they were swept toward a cluster of trees that jutted out into the swollen creek. Marcus managed to grab a sturdy branch with one hand while holding Tommy with the other. The boy was unconscious, his face pale and lips blue. Water poured from his mouth as Marcus held him against the tree, and for a terrifying moment, Marcus thought they had been too late. Then Tommy coughed, water streaming from his nose and mouth as he began to breathe again. His eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, but alive. Marcus felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "I've got you, son," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. "Just hold on, we're going to be okay." But even as he said the words, Marcus wasn't sure how they were going to get out of this situation. They were trapped in the middle of a raging flood, clinging to a tree while debris continued to crash around them. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the water was still rising. Emma waited on the shore, alone and terrified, while he and Tommy fought for their lives in the middle of the torrent. Lightning flashed overhead, and in that brief moment of illumination, Marcus saw something that gave him hope. About 50 yards downstream, where the creek made a sharp bend, the water was shallower and slower. If they could somehow work their way along the tree line to that point, they might be able to reach safety. It would be dangerous. They would have to move from tree to tree, fighting the current every step of the way. But it was their only chance, and Marcus knew that staying where they were wasn't an option. The tree they clung to was beginning to lean under the pressure of the flood, and Marcus could hear the ominous sound of roots beginning to give way. "Tommy," Marcus said, making sure the boy could hear him clearly. "We're going to move to that next tree, then the one after that. I need you to hold on to me as tight as you can. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded weakly, his small hands gripping Marcus's shirt with surprising strength. Marcus took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and let go of their temporary refuge. The current immediately seized them, pulling them downstream with terrifying force. Marcus kicked hard, angling toward the next tree in line, feeling Tommy's weight dragging against him. Debris continued to pummel them as they fought their way through the flood, but somehow Marcus managed to catch hold of another branch just before they were swept past. Tree by tree, fighting for every foot of progress, they worked their way downstream toward the calmer water. Marcus's strength was beginning to fail, his muscles screaming in protest, but he refused to give up. This boy's life depended on him, and Marcus Sullivan had never quit anything in his life. By the time they reached the shallow water at the creek's bend, both Marcus and Tommy were near exhaustion. Marcus's lungs burned, his arms felt like lead, and he could barely feel his hands from the cold. But they were alive, and they were finally in water shallow enough to stand in. Marcus carried Tommy to shore, both of them collapsing on the muddy bank in complete exhaustion. The boy was breathing but weak, his skin frighteningly pale. Marcus knew they needed medical attention immediately, but first he had to get back to Emma, who was still waiting alone by the bridge. The walk back to where he had left Emma seemed to take forever. Marcus carried Tommy, who drifted in and out of consciousness, while fighting against wind and rain that seemed determined to knock them both down. His truck was still parked where he had left it, a beacon of safety in the chaos of the storm. Emma ran to them as soon as she saw them approaching, tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around her brother. For the first time since Marcus had found them, she spoke, her voice small and frightened but filled with relief. "Tommy, I thought you were gone." Marcus helped both children into his truck, cranking up the heater and wrapping them in emergency blankets he kept behind the seat. Tommy was conscious, but shivering violently, and both children were showing signs of hypothermia. Marcus knew he needed to get them to a hospital immediately, but first he had to figure out where they lived and notify their family. "Where do you kids live?" Marcus asked gently as he started the truck. "I need to call your parents." "Maple Street," Tommy said weakly. "Number 42, but—" He hesitated, looking uncertain. "What is it, son?" "Our mom's at work. She cleans offices downtown at night. Dad's—" Tommy's voice trailed off, and Emma pressed closer to her brother. "Our daddy went away," Emma said quietly. "Mommy says he had to find work somewhere else." Marcus felt his heart sink as he began to understand the children's situation. A single mother working night shifts, trying to make ends meet. Kids walking home from school because there was no one to pick them up. It was a story he had heard too many times in small towns across America, families struggling to survive in an economy that seemed stacked against them. "What's your mom's name?" Marcus asked. "I need to let her know you're safe." "Jennifer Martinez," Tommy replied. "She works for County Cleaning Services." Marcus nodded and reached for his phone, hoping the cell towers were back up. To his relief, he had a signal, though it was weak. He quickly dialed information and asked to be connected to County Cleaning Services. After several minutes of being transferred from one person to another, he finally reached someone who could help. "Mrs. Martinez is working at the First National Bank building tonight," the supervisor told him. "I can patch you through to her." While they waited for the connection, Marcus drove carefully through the storm toward the hospital. The rain was finally beginning to let up slightly, though the wind was still fierce. Street lights flickered, and several roads were blocked by fallen trees, but Marcus knew all the back roads in the county and was able to navigate around the obstacles. When Jennifer Martinez came on the line, her voice was tense with worry. "Are my children okay? The school said they left before the storm got bad, but they never made it home." Marcus quickly explained what had happened, being careful to emphasize that both children were safe and would be fine. He could hear the relief in Jennifer's voice when he told her he was taking them to the hospital to be checked out. "I'll meet you there," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Thank you so much for finding them. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. At the hospital, Marcus stayed with Tommy and Emma while they were examined by the emergency room staff. Both children were treated for mild hypothermia and exhaustion, but the doctors said they would make a full recovery. Tommy had swallowed a lot of water and would need to be monitored overnight, but there was no serious damage. Jennifer Martinez arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, still wearing her cleaning uniform and clearly having rushed straight from work. She was a small woman, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes that were red from crying. The moment she saw her children, she burst into tears and gathered them both into her arms. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I should have picked you up from school. I should have been there." "It's not your fault, Mom," Tommy said, his voice stronger now that he was warm and dry. "We thought we could make it home before the storm got bad." Marcus watched the reunion from the corner of the room, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the children were safe, satisfaction that he had been able to help, but also a deep sadness for the family's obvious struggles. Jennifer Martinez was clearly a loving mother doing her best in difficult circumstances, but it was equally clear that she was fighting an uphill battle. As the family talked quietly together, Marcus stepped out into the hallway to give them privacy. The storm was finally passing, though he could still hear rain pattering against the hospital windows. He thought about his own warm, comfortable home where Sarah was probably worried sick about him. He thought about his ranch, his comfortable life, his financial security. And he thought about a young mother working night shifts to support her children, kids who had to walk home from school because there was no other option. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been treating the children, approached Marcus in the hallway. "What you did tonight was incredibly brave," she said. "Those children would have died if you hadn't found them." Marcus nodded but didn't feel like celebrating. They shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. Kids walking home in a storm because their mother can't afford to miss work to pick them up. "Unfortunately, it's more common than you might think," Dr. Chen replied. "We see a lot of families struggling to make ends meet, single parents trying to work multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads." Marcus knew she was right. He had lived in this community his entire life and had seen the economic changes over the years. Small farms closing, factories moving overseas, young people leaving for opportunities in bigger cities. The families who remained often found themselves caught in an endless cycle of working harder just to stay in the same place. When he went back into the room, Marcus found Jennifer trying to figure out how she was going to pay for the hospital bills. She was talking quietly to a hospital administrator, her voice strained with worry. Marcus could see papers in her hands, insurance forms that clearly didn't cover everything. "Mrs. Martinez," Marcus said, approaching the group, "I'd like to take care of the medical expenses." Jennifer looked up at him in surprise. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much." "You're not asking," Marcus replied firmly. "I'm offering. These kids have been through enough tonight. The last thing you need to worry about is bills." The hospital administrator looked relieved. Medical debt was a constant problem for working families in the area, and the hospital often had to write off unpaid bills. Having someone step forward to pay was unusual but welcome. "I really don't know how to thank you," Jennifer said, fresh tears starting to form in her eyes. "You saved their lives and now this." "The best way to thank me is to let me help," Marcus replied. "Sometimes we all need a hand up. Tonight it was your kids who needed help. Tomorrow it might be someone else." As the hospital staff finished their paperwork and prepared to discharge Tommy, Marcus found himself thinking about more than just the immediate crisis. These children had been in danger tonight partly because of circumstances beyond their control. A single mother working to support them. No reliable transportation, limited options for childcare. He couldn't help but wonder how many other families in the community faced similar challenges. Jennifer gathered her children's wet clothes and prepared to leave. She had called a friend to come pick them up, but it would be another hour before help arrived. The friend was dealing with storm damage at her own home and couldn't leave immediately. "Let me drive you home," Marcus offered. "My truck is warmed up and it's still nasty out there." Jennifer hesitated, clearly not wanting to impose further, but Tommy was still weak and Emma was falling asleep on her feet. Finally, she accepted the offer gratefully. The drive to Maple Street took them through parts of town that Marcus rarely visited. Small houses crowded close together, many showing signs of deferred maintenance. Cars in driveways that had seen better days, yards that needed work but whose owners were clearly too busy or too broke to keep up with everything. It was a different world from the comfortable neighborhoods where Marcus's friends and business associates lived. But it was home to hundreds of families trying to build decent lives for themselves and their children. Number 42 Maple Street was a small rental house with a sagging front porch and peeling paint. But Jennifer had clearly done her best to make it a home. Flower boxes sat beneath the front windows, though the flowers had been battered by the storm. A small vegetable garden was visible in the backyard, and children's toys were neatly arranged on the porch. Marcus helped carry the children inside while Jennifer unlocked the door. The interior of the house was clean and tidy, furnished with obvious care despite limited resources. Family photos covered one wall, showing happier times when the family had been complete. Tommy and Emma's school artwork was displayed prominently on the refrigerator, and Marcus could see homework spread out on the kitchen table. "Can I make you some coffee?" Jennifer asked as she settled the children on the couch. "It's the least I can do." Marcus accepted the offer, partly because he was genuinely tired and cold, but mostly because he sensed that Jennifer needed to do something to repay his kindness. Sometimes the gift was in allowing someone to give, not just in the giving itself. As Jennifer busied herself in the kitchen, Marcus looked around the small living room. Despite its modest furnishings, it felt like a home where children were loved and cared for. Books were scattered around, board games stacked on a shelf, and a reading corner had been created with soft cushions and a small lamp. These parents, this mother, was doing everything she could to provide for her children's needs. Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted by his ordeal. Emma curled up beside him, her small hand resting on her brother's arm. Even in sleep, she seemed to be watching over him, the way she had during their terrifying experience under the bridge. "They're good kids," Marcus said when Jennifer returned with steaming mugs of coffee. "They are," Jennifer replied, her voice full of pride and love. "Tommy's always been protective of his sister. Sometimes I think he tries too hard to be the man of the house." "Where is their father?" Marcus asked gently. Jennifer's expression tightened slightly. "Robert left 6 months ago, said he needed to find work in Houston, that he'd send for us when he got established." She paused, staring into her coffee mug. "I haven't heard from him since." Marcus nodded, understanding more than Jennifer knew. He had seen this pattern before in rural communities where economic opportunities were limited. Families torn apart by financial stress, fathers leaving to find work elsewhere, and sometimes never coming back. It was one of the hidden costs of economic decline, measured not in statistics, but in broken families and children who had to grow up too fast. "I work 3 jobs," Jennifer continued. "Days at the diner, evenings cleaning offices, and weekends at the grocery store. It's barely enough, but it's what we've got." Marcus did some quick mental math. 3 minimum wage jobs probably brought in less than $1,500 a month before taxes. Rent, food, utilities, clothes for growing children, school supplies, medical expenses. It was impossible arithmetic. Jennifer Martinez was working herself to exhaustion just to keep her family housed and fed. "What did you do before?" Marcus asked. "I was a teacher's aide at the elementary school," Jennifer said with a slight smile. "I loved working with the kids, and the schedule was perfect because I could be home when Tommy and Emma got out of school. But the district had budget cuts, and I was one of the first to go." "Have you thought about going back to school, getting a teaching degree?" Jennifer laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what time? What money? I can barely keep up with the jobs I have now. College is a dream for people who can afford to dream." Marcus understood the trap she was in. Working multiple low-wage jobs left no time for education or training that might lead to better opportunities. Meanwhile, the lack of education or specialized skills kept her locked into low-wage work. It was a cycle that was nearly impossible to break without help. They talked for another hour while the children slept. Jennifer told him about her dreams for Tommy and Emma, college, careers, opportunities she had never had. She talked about the guilt she felt over not being able to provide them with more, the fear that kept her awake at night wondering what would happen if she got sick or injured and couldn't work. Marcus found himself thinking about his own children, now grown and successful, who had never known what it was like to worry about where their next meal was coming from. He thought about the advantages his wealth had provided them: good schools, college without debt, opportunities to pursue their passions without worrying about survival. When Marcus finally left the Martinez house, it was nearly midnight and the storm had passed. Stars were beginning to appear between the breaking clouds, and the air smelled fresh and clean. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the family he was leaving behind, a hardworking mother and two brave children facing an uncertain future with limited resources but unlimited love. The drive home took him through the wealthier part of town, past houses that were easily 10 times the size of Jennifer's rental. Manicured lawns stretched in the darkness, and luxury cars sat in circular driveways. It was his world, the world he had worked hard to build and deserved to enjoy. But tonight it felt different somehow, less satisfying than it had that morning. Sarah was waiting up for him when he finally arrived home. She had been worried sick when the storm had hit and he hadn't come home. Marcus told her everything that had happened, from finding the children under the bridge to bringing them safely to their mother. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes, proud of her husband's heroism but heartbroken by the family's circumstances. "Those poor Bobbies," Sarah said when Marcus finished his story, "and that mother working so hard just to survive." "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't come along," Marcus said. "Those kids would have died tonight, and for what? Because their mother can't afford reliable childcare, because she has to work 3 jobs just to pay rent." Sarah took her husband's hand. "But you did come along, you saved them." "This time," Marcus replied. "But what about next time? What about all the other families facing the same struggles? Saving Tommy and Emma was just treating the symptom. The disease is still there." As Marcus lay in bed that night, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, he found himself thinking about responsibility. He had always believed in hard work and personal responsibility, the idea that people could succeed if they just tried hard enough. But Jennifer Martinez was working harder than most people he knew, and she was still barely surviving. Maybe the problem wasn't individual failure. Maybe it was systemic inequality, an economy that didn't provide enough opportunities for working families to thrive. Maybe people like him, people with resources and influence, had a responsibility to do more than just rescue children from floods. Maybe they had a responsibility to help build a community where children didn't end up in danger because their parents couldn't afford to protect them. The questions kept him awake long into the night, but Marcus knew that finding the answers would take time. For now, it was enough that 2 children were safe, warm, and loved in their small house on Maple Street. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, the Martinez family was together and whole. As dawn began to break over the Texas countryside, Marcus finally fell asleep, his dreams filled with images of rushing water, frightened children, and a young mother's tears of gratitude. But underneath it all, a new determination was beginning to form, a sense that his encounter with the Martinez family was not an ending, but a beginning. Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom windows and the sound of his wife Sarah moving around downstairs in the kitchen. For a moment, the events of the previous night seemed like a vivid dream, but the mud-stained clothes in a pile by his dresser and the lingering ache in his muscles told him everything had been all too real. Sarah had breakfast waiting for him when he came downstairs: eggs, bacon, toast, and fresh coffee. It was the same breakfast they had shared thousands of times in their 38 years of marriage, but somehow it tasted different this morning. Marcus found himself thinking about Jennifer Martinez, probably getting ready for her shift at the diner after staying up most of the night watching over her children. "I called the hospital," Sarah said as she refilled his coffee cup. "Tommy and Emma were both discharged this morning. The nurse said they're doing fine, no lasting effects from their ordeal." Marcus nodded, feeling a wave of relief. He had slept restlessly, plagued by images of those frightened children clinging to each other under the bridge. Knowing they were safe and healthy lifted a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. "I keep thinking about that family," Sarah continued, sitting down across from him with her own coffee. "A mother working 3 jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. Children walking home from school because there's no other option. It breaks my heart." Marcus looked at his wife, seeing the same thoughts that had kept him awake reflected in her eyes. Sarah had always been the compassionate one in their relationship, the one who volunteered at the church food bank and organized charity drives for families in need. But this felt different, more personal somehow. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, recognizing the expression on his wife's face. After nearly 4 decades together, he could read her moods as easily as the weather. I'm thinking about how fortunate we've been, Sarah said slowly. Good health, successful business, children who never had to worry about their next meal. We've been blessed, Marcus. Maybe it's time we did something more substantial to share those blessings. Marcus knew what she meant, but he wasn't sure he was ready for that conversation yet. He had always been generous in his own way. He paid his ranch hands well above minimum wage, contributed to local charities, and helped out neighbors when they faced emergencies. But Sarah was talking about something bigger, something that would require him to step outside his comfort zone. Let me check on them first, Marcus said. Make sure they're really okay. Marcus drove to Maple Street after breakfast, ostensibly to see how the children were feeling, but really because he couldn't shake the need to make sure they were safe. The neighborhood looked different in daylight, somehow both better and worse than it had seemed the night before. The houses were small but well-maintained by people who clearly took pride in their homes despite limited resources. Gardens showed signs of careful tending, and children's toys were neatly arranged in small yards. But Marcus could also see the signs of economic struggle everywhere he looked. Cars held together with duct tape and prayer, roofs that needed repair, paint jobs that had been put off year after year. These were working families, but they were working in an economy that didn't provide enough return for their labor. Jennifer answered the door wearing a diner uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked exhausted but managed a smile when she saw Marcus. "Mr. Sullivan, I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. Please come in." Marcus stepped inside to find Tommy and Emma sitting at the kitchen table, working on homework. Both children looked much better than they had the night before, color back in their cheeks, alert and talkative. They looked up when Marcus entered, and Emma actually smiled at him. "How are you feeling, Tommy?" Marcus asked, pulling up a chair beside the boy. "Much better, sir," Tommy replied. "The doctor said I was really lucky you found us when you did." Marcus felt that familiar tightness in his chest. These children shouldn't have needed luck. They should have been safe at home when the storm hit, not walking through dangerous weather because their mother couldn't afford to miss work. "I want to thank you again," Jennifer said, pouring Marcus a cup of coffee without asking. "The doctor said hypothermia can be really dangerous for children if you hadn't come along." "But I did," Marcus said gently, accepting the coffee. "And you don't need to keep thanking me. I did what anyone would have done." Jennifer gave him a look that suggested she knew better. Not everyone would have risked their own life to save two children they'd never met. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. In his mind, he had simply done what needed doing. The idea that someone might have driven past those children without stopping was alien to his way of thinking. "Are you going to work today?" Marcus asked Jennifer. "I have to," she replied with a slight shrug. "I already called in sick yesterday when the school closed early. I can't afford to miss another day." Marcus noticed that she didn't mention being tired from spending the night in the hospital with her children. For Jennifer Martinez, personal needs came after financial necessity. It was a calculation that millions of working parents made every day, but that didn't make it any less heartbreaking. "What time does your shift start?" Marcus asked. 11. I work the lunch rush at the diner, then I have a few hours off before I start cleaning offices tonight. Marcus glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was already 10:30, which meant Jennifer would have to leave soon. That also meant Tommy and Emma would be alone for the rest of the day while their mother worked. "Who watches the kids while you're working?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They watch themselves," Jennifer said, lowering her voice slightly. "Tommy's very responsible, and they know not to open the door for strangers or leave the house. Mrs. Chen next door keeps an eye on them, but she works too." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. 8- and 9-year-old children spending their afternoons alone because their mother had no choice but to work multiple jobs. It was a situation faced by countless families, but knowing that didn't make it acceptable. Jennifer gathered her purse and keys, giving both children careful instructions about staying inside and doing their homework. She kissed them goodbye with the fierce intensity of a mother who had come too close to losing them. "I'll be home by 6, she told them. "Mrs. Chen has my work number if there's an emergency." After Jennifer left, Marcus sat with Tommy and Emma for a while, helping them with homework and listening to their chatter about school and friends. They were bright children, curious and eager to learn despite the challenges they faced at home. Tommy showed him a science project he was working on, and Emma proudly displayed her artwork from art class. "Do you like school?" Marcus asked. "I love school," Emma said enthusiastically. "My teacher says I'm really good at reading." "I like school too," Tommy added. "Especially math and science. I want to be an engineer when I grow up." Marcus felt his heart clench as he listened to their dreams and ambitions. These children had so much potential, but they were starting life with obstacles that his own children had never faced. Tommy's natural talent for math and science might never be fully developed if he had to work to help support his family instead of going to college. Emma's love of reading might fade if there weren't enough books at home to nurture her passion. "What kind of engineer?" Marcus asked Tommy. "Maybe civil engineering," Tommy said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "I want to design bridges that won't collapse in floods, bridges that can keep people safe no matter how bad the weather gets." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The boy who had nearly died under a bridge during a flood wanted to grow up to build better, safer bridges. It was the kind of turning trauma into purpose that spoke to an inner strength most adults never developed. Marcus spent the afternoon with the children, ostensibly babysitting but really observing. He watched Tommy help his little sister with her reading homework, saw how carefully they both followed their mother's rules about staying inside and not answering the door. These were children who had learned responsibility early, who understood that their behavior had consequences for their family's survival. When Jennifer came home at 6, exhausted from her shift at the diner, she found Marcus helping Emma with a puzzle while Tommy worked on his math homework at the kitchen table. She stopped in the doorway, looking surprised and grateful. "You didn't have to stay with them," she said, though Marcus could see the relief in her eyes. "I wanted to," Marcus replied honestly. "They're good company." Over dinner, a simple meal of soup and sandwiches that Jennifer had prepared despite her exhaustion, Marcus found himself asking more questions about the family's situation. How long had they lived in Miller County? What had brought them here? What were their hopes for the future? Jennifer had grown up in San Antonio, met Robert in community college where they were both studying to be teachers. They had moved to Miller County when Robert got a job at the high school, and Jennifer had found work as a teacher's aide. For a few years, life had been good, stable jobs, a small but comfortable house, plans for the future. Then the budget cuts came. Robert lost his position when the school district consolidated, and Jennifer's aide position was eliminated. Robert found temporary work at a construction company, but the pay was much less than his teaching salary. Bills began to pile up, stress mounted, and eventually Robert made the decision to leave for Houston where construction jobs paid better. "He was supposed to send for us," Jennifer said quietly, glancing at her children who were absorbed in their homework. "But the last time I heard from him was 3 months ago." Marcus could see the pain in her eyes, the worry about how to explain to Tommy and Emma that their father might not be coming back. Single parenthood was hard enough without the additional burden of financial stress and uncertainty. "Have you thought about moving?" Marcus asked. "Maybe somewhere with more opportunities." Jennifer shook her head. "With what money? I can barely afford rent here, much less a security deposit somewhere else. And I'd have to find new jobs, new childcare, new schools for the kids. At least here we have a roof over our heads and the children have friends." Marcus understood the trap of poverty that kept families stuck in difficult situations. Moving required resources that people barely surviving didn't have. It was easier to judge from the outside than to understand the reality of having no good options. That evening, as Marcus drove home through the affluent neighborhoods near his ranch, he found himself looking at the large houses and manicured lawns with different eyes. Each house probably cost more than Jennifer Martinez would earn in 10 years, yet they sat empty most of the time while their owners traveled or worked long hours to afford their luxury. Sarah was waiting for him in their comfortable living room, reading a book by the fireplace. The scene was peaceful and warm, everything Marcus had worked his entire life to achieve. But tonight it felt incomplete somehow, as if the contrast between his comfort and the Martinez family's struggles had highlighted something missing in his own life. "How are the children?" Sarah asked, looking up from her book. "They're fine," Marcus said, settling into his favorite chair. "Bright, resilient, full of dreams. Tommy wants to be an engineer, build bridges that won't fail in storms." Sarah smiled sadly. "From tragedy to purpose, children are remarkable that way." Sarah, Marcus said slowly, what if we could help more than just this one family? What if we could do something that would make a real difference for working families in this community? Sarah set down her book and gave him her full attention. This was the conversation she had been hopping for since he first told her about rescuing the children. What are you thinking about? Marcus had been thinking about it all day, an idea that had started as a small notion and grown into something much larger. Childcare, he said. Safe, affordable childcare for working parents. Jennifer works 3 jobs but can't afford to have someone watch her children. Tommy and Emma are home alone every afternoon because there's no other option. There are childcare centers in town, Sarah pointed out. That charge more than most working parents can afford, Marcus replied. And most don't have hours that work for people with non-traditional schedules. Jennifer works evenings cleaning offices, weekends at the grocery store. Show me a daycare that stays open until midnight or operates on Sundays. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She had seen the struggle firsthand through her volunteer work. Working parents forced to choose between keeping their jobs and properly supervising their children. Children left alone or with inadequate care because their parents had no other options. What are you proposing? She asked. I don't know yet, Marcus admitted. But there has to be a way to provide quality, affordable childcare for working families, maybe subsidized rates based on income, extended hours to accommodate different work schedules, professional staff trained to help children with homework and provide enrichment activities. That would be expensive, Sarah said, though her tone suggested she was calculating possibilities rather than raising objections. We can afford it, Marcus replied firmly. We can afford to do something that matters, something that would actually change lives instead of just treating emergencies after they happen. They talked late into the night, exploring the possibilities and challenges of starting a community childcare program. Marcus had never undertaken anything like this before. His business experience was in cattle ranching, not social services. But he had a lifetime of experience in solving complex problems, and he was beginning to see this as the most important problem he had ever tackled. Over the next few days, Marcus began researching childcare needs in Miller County. What he discovered was both heartening and heartbreaking. There were dozens of families struggling with the same issues the Martinez family faced: single parents working multiple jobs, 2-parent households where both adults worked but still couldn't afford quality childcare, children spending afternoons alone or in questionable situations because their parents had no alternatives. Marcus visited the existing childcare centers in town and found exactly what he had expected. High-quality care that cost more than many families could afford, with waiting lists months long and hours that didn't accommodate non-traditional work schedules. The centers that were more affordable were often overcrowded and understaffed, providing little more than basic supervision. He also discovered that there were licensing requirements, regulations, and bureaucratic hurdles that made opening a new childcare facility a complex undertaking. But Marcus had spent 40 years navigating government regulations in the cattle business. He knew how to work within systems to achieve his goals. The more research Marcus did, the more convinced he became that this was something he could and should do. The need was real, the impact would be substantial, and he had the resources to make it happen. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. This kind of project would require expertise he didn't have, community support he would need to build, and careful planning to ensure success. Marcus began reaching out to people who might be able to help. The director of the county health department provided information about licensing requirements. A retired school principal offered insights into child development and educational programming. Sarah contacted friends from her church and volunteer organizations to gauge community interest and support. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Everyone Marcus spoke with confirmed the need for better childcare options and expressed enthusiasm for a program that would actually serve working families. Several people volunteered to help with planning and implementation, and others offered financial support for the project. But it was Jennifer Martinez's reaction that convinced Marcus he was on the right track. When he mentioned his idea during one of his regular visits to check on Tommy and Emma, her eyes filled with tears. "You would do that?" she asked incredulously. "Create a childcare program for families like mine?" "Not just for families like yours," Marcus replied. "For your family specifically, and for every other family in this county that's struggling with the same challenges." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, looking at her children who were doing homework at the kitchen table. Tommy was helping Emma with her math, just as he had been doing the afternoon Marcus first stayed with them. "It would change everything," she said finally. "If I knew Tommy and Emma were safe and supervised after school, if I didn't have to worry about them being alone when I work evenings. I could maybe think about going back to school, getting that teaching degree. I could plan for a future instead of just surviving from day to day." That was the moment Marcus knew with complete certainty that this was what he was meant to do. Not just rescue children from floods, but help build a community where children didn't end up in dangerous situations because their parents lacked options. Not just treat symptoms, but address root causes. Marcus threw himself into the project with the same intensity he had brought to building his ranch. He formed a planning committee, hired consultants to help with licensing and facility design, and began looking for a suitable location for the childcare center. Sarah took charge of developing programming and curriculum, drawing on her years of volunteer work with children and families. The project quickly grew beyond what Marcus had initially envisioned. The planning committee suggested adding a food program to provide meals for children whose families struggled with food insecurity. A local pediatrician offered to provide basic health screenings. A retired librarian volunteered to develop a literacy program. What started as an idea to provide safe childcare for working families was evolving into a comprehensive support system that would address multiple challenges facing children and families in the community. Marcus found a perfect location for the center, a former elementary school building that had been closed due to budget cuts. The building was structurally sound, already equipped with classrooms and a cafeteria, and had a large playground that would be perfect for outdoor activities. The school district was willing to sell the building at well below market value, recognizing the community benefit of the proposed childcare program. As word of the project spread through Miller County, Marcus was approached by other families with stories similar to the Martinez families. Single mothers working multiple jobs to support their children. Two-parent households where both adults worked but still struggled to afford quality childcare. Grandparents trying to raise grandchildren on fixed incomes while their adult children worked whatever jobs they could find. Each story reinforced Marcus's conviction that this project was necessary and important, but they also revealed the scope of the challenge he was taking on. The need for affordable, quality childcare was much larger than he had initially realized, and the impact of not having it was devastating families throughout the community. Marcus began to understand that his encounter with Tommy and Emma under the bridge had been more than just a rescue mission. It had been a wake-up call, forcing him to see problems in his own community that he had been too insulated to notice before. His comfortable life had shielded him from the daily struggles of working families, but once his eyes were opened, he couldn't ignore what he saw. The planning process took 6 months, but Marcus was determined to do it right. The childcare center would be licensed and professionally staffed, with low teacher-to-child ratios that would ensure individual attention. It would offer sliding-scale fees based on family income, with some families paying full market rates and others paying what they could afford. The program would operate extended hours to accommodate different work schedules, including evening and weekend care for parents who worked non-traditional hours. Most importantly, the center would provide more than just supervision. There would be homework help, enrichment activities, meals and snacks, and support services to help families access other resources they might need. The goal wasn't just to keep children safe while their parents worked, but to give them opportunities to learn and grow that they might not otherwise have. As the opening date approached, Marcus found himself both excited and nervous. This was the largest and most important project he had ever undertaken, with the potential to impact dozens of families for years to come. But it was also uncharted territory for him, requiring skills and knowledge he was still developing. Jennifer Martinez was among the first families to enroll their children in the new program. Tommy and Emma would be able to come to the center directly from school, receive help with homework, participate in educational activities, and eat a healthy dinner before their mother picked them up after her evening shift. For the first time since Robert had left, Jennifer would know her children were safe and supervised while she worked. "I still can't believe this is really happening," Jennifer told Marcus during the enrollment process. "A year ago, I was struggling just to keep my children fed and housed. Now Tommy can participate in the science club and Emma can join the art program. You've given them opportunities I never dreamed were possible." But Marcus knew the real test would come when the center actually opened its doors. Would the programming work as planned? Would families actually use the services? Would the center be financially sustainable over the long term? Would it really make a difference in the lives of working families? The night before the center was scheduled to open, Marcus stood in the renovated building, looking at the bright classrooms and modern playground equipment. Sarah stood beside him, both of them marveling at how far the project had come from that initial conversation about helping one family. "Tomorrow we find out if this was all worth it," Marcus said, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "We already know it was worth it," Sarah replied, taking his hand. "Even if we only help one child avoid what Tommy and Emma went through, even if we only give one parent the peace of mind that comes with knowing their children are safe, it was worth it." Marcus nodded, but he hoped for much more than that. He hoped this center would be the beginning of something larger, a model that could be replicated in other communities facing similar challenges. He hoped it would demonstrate that successful businesses and wealthy individuals had a responsibility to invest in their communities, not just to provide charity, but to create sustainable solutions to systemic problems. As he locked the building and headed home, Marcus thought about the children who would walk through those doors tomorrow morning. Some, like Tommy and Emma, were already familiar to him. Others were names on enrollment forms, families he hadn't met yet but who were facing the same challenges that had nearly cost 2 children their lives during a storm. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, not just for the families who would use the childcare center, but for Marcus himself. He had discovered that success wasn't just about building wealth or achieving personal goals. True success came from using whatever advantages you had been given to create opportunities for others, to build communities where all children could thrive regardless of their family's economic circumstances. The boy who had wanted to build better bridges was already enrolled in the center's after-school program. Soon, he would have a safe place to do homework, explore his interest in engineering, and dream about a future where his talents could flourish. And perhaps one day, the bridges Tommy Martinez designed would save other children from the kind of danger he and his sister had faced on that stormy night. Marcus drove home through neighborhoods both wealthy and poor, past houses where children slept safely in their beds, and others where parents lay awake worrying about tomorrow's challenges. But tonight, for the first time since that storm, Marcus felt like he was part of the solution rather than just a witness to the problem. Tomorrow, real change would begin. The Miller County Children's Center opened its doors on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after the storm that had changed everything. Marcus arrived early, wanting to be there when the first children walked through the doors of what had once been Lincoln Elementary School. The building had been transformed over the past months. Fresh paint brightened the hallways. New playground equipment sparkled in the morning sun, and the smell of breakfast cooking in the renovated cafeteria drifted through the air. Marcus stood in the main hallway, watching as staff members made final preparations for the day. Sarah was in the art room, arranging supplies and hanging colorful posters on freshly painted walls. The center's director, Maria Santos, moved efficiently between classrooms, checking that everything was ready for their first day of operation. Maria had been Marcus's best hire, a former elementary school principal with 20 years of experience working with children from diverse backgrounds. She understood the challenges facing working families because she had once been a single mother herself, juggling multiple jobs while raising 2 children. Her combination of professional expertise and personal experience made her the perfect person to lead this venture. "Nervous?" Maria asked, stopping beside Marcus in the hallway. "Terrified," Marcus admitted with a laugh. "This is completely different from anything I've ever done before. With cattle ranching, you know pretty quickly if you're doing something wrong. With this, you'll know just as quickly," Maria assured him. "Children are honest judges. If we're providing something they need, they'll thrive. If we're missing the mark, they'll let us know." The first family arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, Jennifer Martinez with Tommy and Emma. Tommy, now 10 years old, had grown taller over the past year, but he still held his sister's hand protectively as they entered the building. Emma, 9 now, carried a small backpack decorated with horses and looked around with wide, curious eyes. "Good morning," Maria greeted them warmly. "Are you ready for your first day at the center?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, but Tommy hung back slightly, still protective of his sister in new situations. Marcus knelt down to their level, remembering the frightened children he had pulled from floodwater a year ago. "What do you think?" Marcus asked them. "Does it look like a good place to spend your afternoons?" "It's bigger than I thought it would be," Tommy said, finally allowing some excitement to creep into his voice. "Mom said there's a science lab." "There is," Maria confirmed. "Would you like to see it?" As Maria led the children on a tour of the facility, Marcus watched Jennifer's face. The perpetual worry lines that had marked her expression for so long seemed to ease slightly, as she saw the bright classrooms, the well-equipped kitchen, and the dedicated homework area with computers and reference books. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this is all a dream," Jennifer said quietly to Marcus as they followed the children down the hallway. "How are things going at home?" Marcus asked. He had stayed in touch with the Martinez family throughout the year, watching as Jennifer's situation gradually stabilized. "Much better," Jennifer replied, and Marcus could hear the genuine relief in her voice. "I was able to quit the weekend job at the grocery store once I knew the children would be safe here after school. Having Sundays off has been—" She paused, searching for words. "I can't remember the last time I had a full day to just be their mother." Marcus nodded, understanding how significant that change was. One of the goals of the childcare center had been to give working parents more time with their families, not less. By providing safe, supervised care during critical hours, they hoped to reduce the stress and impossible choices that tore families apart. More families began arriving as the morning progressed. Marcus recognized some faces from the enrollment process, but others were new to him. A young father dropping off twin boys before rushing to his construction job. A grandmother who had custody of her granddaughter while the child's parents dealt with addiction. A military wife whose husband was deployed overseas and who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet while he was gone. Each family had a story, and Marcus found himself wanting to know all of them. But he also recognized that his role wasn't to be involved in every family's daily struggles. The center needed to function as a professional operation, not as Marcus Sullivan's personal charity project. By 9 o'clock, 23 children between the ages of 5 and 12 were settled into their respective programs. The younger ones would spend the day in structured activities until their schools dismissed, while the school-age children would arrive in the afternoon for after-school care. The center was licensed for 40 children, but Maria had recommended starting smaller to work out any operational issues. Marcus spent the morning observing, trying to stay out of the way while still keeping an eye on how things were going. The staff moved smoothly through their routines: breakfast, educational activities for the younger children, preparations for the after-school program. Everything seemed to be working exactly as planned. The real test came at 3 o'clock when yellow school buses began pulling up to discharge children from the various elementary and middle schools in the county. Tommy and Emma were among the first to arrive, followed by a steady stream of children ranging from kindergartners to 7th graders. Marcus watched from the main office as children hung up backpacks, grabbed snacks from the kitchen, and settled into homework areas or activity rooms according to their individual schedules. The noise level rose considerably, but it was the sound of happy, engaged children rather than chaos. Tommy headed straight for the science room, where high school volunteers were available to help with advanced math and science homework. Emma joined a group of younger children in the art room, where Sarah was leading them in a project involving watercolors and autumn leaves. "Mr. Sullivan?" A small voice drew Marcus's attention to a girl of about 7 standing in the office doorway. She had dark curls and wore a school uniform that was clean but showed signs of having been mended several times. "Yes, sweetheart." "I'm Sophia," the girl said shyly. "My abuela said you're the man who built this place for kids like us." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Your abuela was right. Do you like it here so far?" Sophia nodded vigorously. "It's the nicest place I've ever been, and Miss Maria said we get to eat dinner here too, not just snacks." Marcus had insisted that the center provide substantial meals, not just snacks. Too many children in working families went home to empty refrigerators or had to wait until their parents finished work shifts to eat dinner. The center's kitchen served breakfast for early arrivals, lunch for full-day children, and dinner for those whose parents worked evening shifts. "Are you hungry now?" Marcus asked Sophia. "A little," she admitted, "but Miss Maria said we don't eat until 4:30 after homework time." "That's right. Have you started your homework yet?" "I don't have any," Sophia said with a slight frown. My teacher said first graders don't get homework, but I wish I did because the homework room looks really cool. Marcus smiled at her earnest expression. Would you like me to ask Miss Maria if you can join the reading group instead? I think there are some other children your age working on reading skills. Sophia's face lit up. Could I? I love reading. As Marcus walked Sophia to the reading room, he realized that this was what he had hoped for when planning the center. Children who were excited about learning, who saw this place as somewhere special rather than just somewhere to wait for their parents. The center wasn't just providing childcare, it was providing opportunities. The afternoon progressed smoothly, with children moving between homework help, enrichment activities, and free play according to their individual schedules. Marcus observed a chess club meeting in one classroom, a beginning Spanish class in another, and a group of children working together to build structures with blocks and engineering toys. Tommy had settled in with two other boys his age, all of them bent over a complex math problem with intense concentration. Marcus could overhear snippets of their conversation, discussions about different approaches to solving equations, debates about which method would be most efficient. These children were challenging each other intellectually in ways that might never have happened if they had spent their afternoon alone or in less structured environments. At 5 o'clock, parents began arriving to pick up their children. Marcus stationed himself near the front entrance, wanting to gauge parents' reactions to their children's first-day experience. Jennifer was among the first to arrive, coming directly from her shift at the diner. How did it go? She asked Tommy and Emma as they gathered their belongings. It was amazing, Emma bubbled with excitement. Miss Sarah taught us how to paint with watercolors, and we got to eat turkey sandwiches for snack, and there's a library with chapter books. Tommy was more reserved but equally enthusiastic. The science room has microscopes, Mom, real ones, not toy ones, and Mr. Peterson said I can work on advanced problems if I finish my regular homework. Marcus watched Jennifer's face as she listened to her children's excitement. The worry lines that had become permanently etched around her eyes over the past year seemed to soften slightly as she realized that her children hadn't just been safely supervised. They had actually enjoyed their time at the center. Did you eat dinner? Jennifer asked, doing the mental calculation of whether she needed to stop at the grocery store on the way home. We ate at 5, Tommy confirmed. Chicken and rice and green beans, and there was chocolate milk. Marcus could see the relief in Jennifer's expression. Knowing that her children had been fed a nutritious meal meant one less thing for her to worry about, one less expense to stress over when money was tight. As families departed, Marcus found himself in conversations with several parents about their first-day experiences. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Children who had enjoyed the activities, parents relieved to know their kids were safe and supervised, families grateful for the hot meals and homework help. But Marcus also heard suggestions and concerns that would need to be addressed. One mother mentioned that her daughter was shy and had trouble joining group activities. A father suggested that the center might consider offering tutoring for children who were struggling academically. Several parents asked about expanding the program to include summer care when schools were closed. Maria gathered the staff for a debriefing session after all the children had been picked up. The consensus was that the first day had gone well, but everyone had observed areas where improvements could be made. The noise level in the main hallway had been problematic during transitions between activities. Some children had needed more individual attention than anticipated. The schedule for serving meals would need to be adjusted to avoid long lines in the cafeteria. These are exactly the kinds of issues we expected to encounter, Maria assured the staff. We'll make adjustments as we go, and I'm confident we'll have most of the kinks worked out within a few weeks. Marcus stayed late to help clean up and prepare for the next day. As he walked through the quiet building, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what he had envisioned a year ago when he first conceived the idea, a place where working families could send their children with confidence, knowing they would be safe, fed, and engaged in meaningful activities. Over the next few weeks, Marcus made daily visits to the center, not to interfere with operations, but to observe and learn. He watched as shy children like Sophia gradually came out of their shells and formed friendships with other kids. He saw Tommy excel in the advanced math group and begin talking about participating in the county science fair. he observed Emma's artwork become more sophisticated under Sarah's gentle guidance. But perhaps most importantly, he saw the impact on the families themselves. Parents who no longer rushed frantically from work to pick up children they worried about. Families who sat down to dinner together because the children had already eaten and done homework at the center. Single mothers who could consider taking evening classes or second jobs that offered better opportunities because they knew their children were safely supervised. Jennifer Martinez was a perfect example of the center's broader impact. With reliable after-school care for Tommy and Emma, she had been able to quit her weekend grocery store job and use that time to study for her GED. She was now enrolled in online courses that would allow her to work toward a teaching degree while maintaining her current employment. "I haven't felt this hopeful about the future in years," Jennifer told Marcus during one of their regular check-in conversations. "For the first time since Robert left, I can actually plan beyond just getting through the next week." Marcus was also beginning to understand the ripple effects of the center's presence in the community. Local businesses were finding it easier to retain employees who no longer had to leave work early to pick up children or who missed shifts due to childcare problems. Schools reported improvement in homework completion and academic performance among children who attended the center. The pediatrician who volunteered at the center identified several children with health issues that had gone undiagnosed because their families couldn't afford regular checkups. But the success of the center also revealed the magnitude of unmet need in the community. Marcus received calls almost daily from families wanting to enroll children, and there was already a waiting list for several age groups. Parents begged him to consider opening additional locations or expanding the current facility. The financial model Marcus had developed was proving sustainable, but barely. Families paid sliding-scale fees based on their income, with some paying full market rates and others paying significantly less. Corporate sponsors and individual donors helped bridge the gap, but Marcus knew that long-term viability would require ongoing fundraising and careful financial management. Marcus began exploring the possibility of replicating the center model in other communities. He received inquiries from civic leaders in neighboring counties who had heard about the center's success and wanted to understand how to create similar programs in their own areas. But even as Marcus considered expansion, he remained focused on perfecting the original center. He instituted monthly family meetings where parents could provide feedback and suggestions. He brought in consultants to evaluate the educational programming and ensure it met the highest standards. He worked with Maria to develop advanced training programs for staff to keep them current with best practices in child development and education. 6 months after opening, the center underwent its first formal evaluation by state licensing officials. Marcus was nervous about the inspection, knowing that any deficiencies could jeopardize the center's ability to operate. But the inspectors were impressed with the quality of programming, the professional competence of the staff, and the obvious engagement of the children. "This is one of the highest quality childcare facilities I've evaluated," the lead inspector told Marcus. "You've created something really special here." The inspector's comments were gratifying, but Marcus knew the real measure of success came from the families who used the center every day. Children who bounded through the doors each afternoon with excitement about their activities. Parents who spoke about having peace of mind for the first time in years. Staff members who found deep satisfaction in work that made a tangible difference in children's lives. Marcus also began